The Galactic Union Tribunal of Sector 9 was, by every measurable standard, the most prestigious court in 47 star systems. Its walls were carved from moonstone. Its judges wore robes woven from the silk of the Velarun spider, which, for the record, was worth more per thread than most planetary GDPs. The air inside smelled faintly of authority and expensive cologne. It was the kind of place that made criminals weep before they even sat down. Magistrate Vorlen Quiss had presided over this court for 32 years. He had sentenced warlords. He had condemned pirates. He had once looked a Drukhari crime lord directly in his 6 eyes and did not flinch. He was, by all accounts, a very impressive person. None of that was going to help him today. Because today, sitting in the defendant's chair, was a human. Not just any human, mind you. Those were already terrifying enough. No, this was a human from Verax Station, which orbited a planet the Galactic Union had officially classified as, and Vorlen was reading directly from the file here. A statistically improbable hellscape that should not, under any reasonable cosmic law, sustain life, and yet, the file was 47 pages long. The human's name took up half a page by itself. Mara Sollis Okafor. She was not large by human standards. Vorlen had done his research. She stood at approximately 1.7 meters tall. She weighed, according to the pre-trial medical scan, 68 kilograms. She had brown skin, dark eyes, and hair. She had apparently braided herself this morning with something she found in the holding cell, because the guards had forgotten to give her a comb, and she, quote, made do. She did not look like a threat. She was smiling. That was the first problem. Vorlen had attended 17 sentencing proceedings involving humans in his career. 17. Not one of them had ever smiled in this room. They cried, sometimes. They argued, often. One had actually tried to fight the bailiff, which had ended poorly for the bailiff. But smiling, in the tribunal, while sitting in the defendant's chair. That was new. Vorlen straightened his robes, cleared his throat, and addressed the courtroom with the full weight of his 32 years behind his voice. The court is now in session, he said. The defendant, Mara Sollis Okafor, citizen of Verax Station, has been charged with the following: destruction of private property on Pallus Minor, unlawful interference with a Galactic Union enforcement vessel, assault of 3 registered officers of the Pallus Minor Security Corps, and Vorlen paused here, because this next part still confused him. The theft of a sandwich. The courtroom was silent for exactly 1 second. Then Mara Sollis Okafor said, "To be fair, the sandwich was incredible." The courtroom exploded. Not literally, though with a human present, Vorlen supposed he should not rule that out entirely. The gallery erupted into shocked murmurs. The prosecution counsel, a slim, blue-scaled Pallone named Vethric Sorn, shot to his feet with an indignation that radiated off him like a heat lamp. The defense counsel, a tired-looking Marathi named Gesit Dal, who had clearly been assigned this case minutes before it started, put his head in his hands. Vorlen raised his gavel and brought it down with the practiced crack of a judge who had heard everything. "Order," he said. "Order in this court." The room quieted. Mara Sollis Okafor was still smiling. Vorlen looked at her very carefully. He was a creature of careful observation. It was why he had survived 3 decades in this seat. And what he observed was this. The human was not performing the smile. She was not smiling because she was trying to seem harmless, or trying to manipulate the court, or trying to make some kind of statement. She was smiling because she was genuinely entertained. This, more than anything else in the file, was what worried him. "Ms. Okafor," he said, "do you understand the severity of the charges against you?" "Yes," she said pleasantly. "Do you want me to list them back? I have a good memory." "That will not be necessary. The sandwich one is my favorite." "Ms. Okafor." Sorry, continue." Vethric Sorn was practically vibrating with prosecutorial fury. He marched to the center of the floor with the kind of confidence that only comes from having an airtight case and an audience. He was good at this. Vorlen had seen him argue before. The Pallon had a gift for making facts sound like moral failures. "Your Honor," Vethric began, his scales flushing a deep, agitated teal, "the events of the 14th of Gamark on Pallus Minor represent a catastrophic breach of Galactic Union law." The defendant entered the Arvan commercial district at approximately 9th hour. Within 40 minutes, she had caused the structural collapse of 2 market stalls, disabled a GU enforcement skiff using, and I quote from the technical report, a piece of pipe and what appeared to be her bare hands, assaulted 3 officers of the law with varying degrees of force, and departed the scene carrying a sandwich she had not paid for. He turned to face the gallery for emphasis. She then ate it, he said, with the gravity of a man announcing a war crime. In front of the officers, a ripple of horror moved through the gallery. Several Pallus delegates pressed their hands to their chest plates in distress. Mara Sollis Okafor nodded appreciatively. "Garglic flatbread," she said. "Really solid. Whoever made it should open a chain." Gesset Dahl made a noise that was somewhere between a groan and a prayer. Vorlen set down his gavel very slowly, because he was a professional, and professionals did not throw gavels. "Mr. Okafor, I will remind you that this is not a food review panel." Right. My bad. Do you have anything to say in your defense before we proceed to the evidence phase? Mara leaned back in her chair with a calm that seemed to Vorlen almost medically impossible given the circumstances. "I have a few things," she said, "but I'd like to hear what Sorn has first. He's good. I want to see where he takes the pipe thing." Vethric Sorn stiffened. His scales shifted to a color Vorlen had never seen before, and suspected was specific to extreme personal insult. "I am," Vethric said, very quietly, "not performing for your amusement." "I know," Mara said. "That's what makes it good." Vorlen decided, then and there, that this was going to be the strangest day of his career. He was right. The evidence phase began with the surveillance footage from the Arvin commercial district. This was, under normal circumstances, the most straightforward part of any trial. You showed the footage. The footage showed what happened. The defendant usually went pale, or angry, or began whispering furiously to their counsel. Mara watched the footage with her chin resting on her hand, the way someone watches a film they have already seen but still enjoy. The footage was, objectively, extraordinary. It began with her walking through the market, calmly. Normally, she was carrying a bag, browsing stalls, occasionally picking things up and setting them down. Standard market behavior, nothing alarming. Then came the Pallus Minor security corps, 3 of them, in full enforcement gear, moving through the crowd with the practiced urgency of people who had already decided what they were going to do before they arrived. They converged on a stall near the east end of the market, where a small, grey-furred Marathi vendor was frantically trying to pack up his goods. One of the officers grabbed the vendor by the arm. The other 2 began dismantling his stall. The vendor was saying something. The footage did not have audio for this section, but you could read it in his body language. He was pleading. The market crowd moved away from this scene, because crowds, universally, across every species in the known galaxy, do one thing when authority arrives in force. They find somewhere else to be. All except one person. Mara Sollis Okafor, carrying her bag, walked toward the scene instead of away from it. She said something to the officers. There was a brief exchange. One of the officers pointed at her in the universal gesture of, "This is not your business." She appeared to nod, consider this, and then say something else. Another exchange. The officer who had grabbed the vendor took a step toward Mara, and then things got interesting. Vorlen had reviewed this footage 17 times in preparation. He still was not entirely sure what he was watching. The sequence of events was clear enough, in broad strokes. What defied his understanding was the specifics. The officer who stepped toward Mara was wearing full enforcement plating, standard issue. It weighed, the technical report noted helpfully, approximately 40 kilograms, and was rated to withstand blunt impact forces up to 3,000 newtons. It was the kind of armor that made its wearer feel reasonably untouchable. Mara hit him once. Not with a weapon, not with the pipe yet, that came later. With her fist, just her fist, and the officer, armor and all, went sideways into the market stall behind him with enough force to collapse the entire left structure. The gallery had gone very quiet watching this. The second officer came at her from the right. She stepped into the movement, not away from it, which was already alarming, and used what Vorlen's consultant had described as leverage born from a species that spent millennia fighting things larger than itself on a planet, actively trying to kill it. The second officer ended up face down on the market floor. He was fine, technically. The third officer had apparently made a radio call for backup at this point, which showed admirable professionalism and also very good survival instincts. He was also holding the pipe, which he had grabbed from a fallen stall as an improvised weapon. Mara took the pipe from him. The report did not elaborate on how. The footage made it look simple in the way that things done by people who are very good at them always look simple, which is to say, it was absolutely not simple. She used the pipe on the enforcement skiff that had just arrived. 2 strikes to the propulsion panel. The skiff made a noise like a disappointed trombone and sank 3 feet to the ground, where it sat, thoroughly disabled, looking sorry for itself. She handed the pipe back to the 3rd officer. Then she walked to the food stall 2 spots over, picked up a flatbread sandwich, and took a bite while the 3 officers stared at her from various positions on the ground. Footage end. The courtroom was silent. Mara nodded slowly. "They got my good side," she said. Guess it. Dahl appeared to have stopped breathing. Vorlen set down the remote with the controlled precision of a man choosing not to react. "Miss Okafor," he said, "what is your explanation for this sequence of events?" "They were shaking down a vendor," she said simply. The smile was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, not gone, just settled, like a planet settling into its orbit. "Old Ferran Maz, he runs that stall, has for 12 years. They've been hitting him for protection payments for 8 months. He couldn't pay this week, so they showed up to make an example." She tilted her head at Vethric Sorn. "Is that in your file?" she asked. "Because it's in mine." Vethric's scales went very, very still. Vorlen looked at the prosecution table, then back at Mara. "You have documentation of this claim?" "I have 17 sworn statements from market vendors, 2 internal payment records from the Security Corps that I am going to pretend I obtained legally, and a name," she said. "Commander Brel Osen, who, funny coincidence, is the one who filed the charges against me. Also funny coincidence, he's not in this courtroom today." The temperature in the room had changed. Vorlen could feel it, the way the air changed before a storm, or before something you were not prepared for arrived at your doorstep. He looked at Vethric Sorn. "Counsel," he said carefully, "is Commander Osin present?" Vethric cleared his throat. He was unavailable for today's proceedings. "Unavailable? Yes, Your Honor." Vorlen made a note. He made several notes. His pen moved with the focused energy of someone who had just realized the case he thought he was presiding over was not in fact the case he was presiding over. Mara watched him make notes with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Ms. Okafor," Vorlen said without looking up. "Who sent you to Pallus Minor?" "I travel a lot," she said pleasantly. "That is not an answer." "No," she agreed, "it's not." He did look up then. 32 years of this had given him a very specific look, the kind that had made warlords uncomfortable. He aimed it at Mara Sollis Okafor with everything he had. She looked back at him with those dark, calm eyes, and he understood, suddenly and completely, what the pre-trial psychological assessment had meant when it flagged her file with the note, "Subject displays no observable threat response to authority figures. Recommend caution." He had thought that was bureaucratic overstatement at the time. He was revising that opinion now. "The court will recess for 40 minutes, he said. "Prosecution, I will require all documentation related to Commander Osin's filing of these charges, his whereabouts today, and any prior complaints filed against the Arvin District Security Corps, all of it, on my desk before we reconvene." Vethric looked like a man who had come to a picnic and discovered he was the food. "Your Honor, I must object to the implication that—" "Counsel," Vorlen said, and his voice was very quiet, which in this room meant very serious. "My desk. 40 minutes. He brought the gavel down. The courtroom rose. And Mara Sollis Okafor, citizen of Verac Station, denizen of a Deathworld that should not by any cosmic right sustain intelligent life, sat back in her chair, looked up at the ceiling of the most prestigious court in 47 star systems, and smiled like she already knew how this was going to go, which, as Vorlen would later tell his wife over a very stiff drink, was the part that frightened him most of all, because she probably did. The 40-minute recess lasted 2 hours and 19 minutes. Vorlen Quiss spent most of it in his private chamber, reading documents that kept arriving in batches, each batch worse than the last, in the way that bad news always travels in groups, like it is afraid to show up alone. His clerk, a young Paloon named Seti, who had ambitions of becoming a judge someday, and was now quietly reconsidering that life choice, kept bringing him tea and new files with the expression of someone delivering letters to a man standing in a rising flood. The tea was good, the files were not. Commander Brel Osen, it turned out, was not simply unavailable, he had left Pallus Minor entirely. His personal transport had departed from the private docking ring at the Arvin security headquarters at approximately the same time. Mara Sollis Okafor was being escorted into the tribunal holding facility, which was to say, the moment charges were filed and the case became official record, the man who filed those charges had quietly folded himself into a ship and pointed it at the outer edge of the sector. This was Professionally speaking, a very guilty thing to do. The 17 sworn statements Mara had referenced were real. Vorlen had 3 of them already verified by the time the recess ended, and his verification officer, a methodical Karathi named Belsin who did not make mistakes, had flagged all 3 as credible. The payment records were real too, though how Mara had obtained them was a question that Vorlen was going to put in a box in the back of his mind and close the lid on, because some questions in his experience were better left in boxes. He straightened his robes. He walked back into the courtroom. The gallery had gotten louder during the recess. Word had moved through it the way word always moved through closed rooms full of people who were not supposed to be talking, instantly and completely. The Pallum delegates in the upper tier were in heated conversation. The press section was practically vibrating. 3 new faces had appeared in the gallery who had not been there before, wearing the kind of plain, unremarkable clothing that people wear when they are trying very hard not to look like they belong to an organization. Vorlen noted them. He noted everything. 32 years. Mara Sollis Okafor was exactly where he had left her. She had somehow acquired a cup of something hot, which she was drinking with the relaxed contentment of a person on a midday break. Gesit Dal was beside her, also with a cup, and the 2 of them appeared to be having a quiet, almost friendly conversation, which Vorlen found deeply strange because defendants and their court-appointed counsel did not usually look like they were discussing favorite restaurants. He took his seat. The room settled. "Court is back in session," he said. "Before we proceed, I am compelled to note several developments for the official record." Vethric Sorn, who had spent the recess looking progressively more like a man being slowly lowered into something unpleasant, sat stiffly at the prosecution table. His scales had gone to a flat, muted grey. That was the Pallun equivalent of someone who has stopped arguing because they have run out of ground to stand on. Vorlen continued. "It has come to this court's attention that Commander Brel Osin, the filing officer of record for these charges, has departed Pallus Minor without notification to this court, without fulfilling his legal obligation as a witness of record, and without, it appears, any particular concern for how this would look." He paused. "It looks very bad, for the record." Nobody in the room laughed, but several people in the gallery appeared to be working hard at not laughing, which Vorlen appreciated. Dignity was a group project. "Furthermore," he said, "this court has received preliminary verification of documentation provided by the defendant suggesting a pattern of unlawful financial coercion against vendors operating in the Arvin commercial district, allegedly conducted by officers under Commander Osin's command, over a period of not less than 8 months. He set down the documents. He looked at Vethric Sorn. "Counsel," he said, "would the prosecution like to revise its position?" Vethric sat very still for a moment. Then he said, with the careful tone of a man diffusing something, "The prosecution is prepared to acknowledge that the scope of this proceeding may require reassessment." "Reassessment," Vorlen repeated. "Yes, Your Honor. That is a very composed way," Vorlen said, "of saying that the case against the defendant appears to have been filed by the person the defendant was effectively investigating." The gallery made a sound. It was not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur. It was the sound of a room full of people revising their understanding of what they were watching. Mara set down her cup. She had the expression of someone watching a very good puzzle come together, the kind that looked impossible until the last piece went in and then seemed obvious. "Ms. Okafor," Vorlen said, turning to her, "I am going to ask you a direct question. I would appreciate a direct answer." "I'll do my best," she said, which was not a promise, but was at least honest. "Were you on Pallus Minor because someone sent you there, specifically to document what was happening in the Arvin district?" Mara considered this. She looked at the 3 plainclothed figures in the gallery for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at Vorlen. "I was in the market because I like markets," she said. "What happened after that was because I do not enjoy watching people get hurt for not paying money they don't owe." Vorlen held her gaze. He was not getting a straight answer, and he knew it, and she knew he knew it. But it was, he conceded privately, a very good non-answer. Clean, nothing to pull on. He made a note. "Very well," he said. He folded his hands on the bench. He had rehearsed this next part in his head during the recess, because what he was about to do was unusual, and he preferred to be precise about unusual things. "The court finds as follows." The room went quiet, real quiet, the kind that happens when something official is about to be said and everyone knows it. On the charge of destruction of private property, 2 market stalls were damaged during the incident of the 14th of Gamark. Both stalls belonged to Arvin district vendors. Both vendors have submitted statements indicating the damage occurred in the course of a confrontation initiated by Security Corps officers. The defendant did not initiate that confrontation. This charge is dismissed. Guess it. Dal blinked. He had not expected that. He was going to need a moment. On the charge of unlawful interference with a Galactic Union enforcement vessel, the vessel in question was a Security Corps skiff dispatched in response to a radio call made during an encounter that this court has determined was itself an unlawful act by the officers involved. Interference with a vehicle used to enforce an unlawful act does not constitute interference with lawful authority. This charge is dismissed. Vethric Sorn closed his eyes. He was breathing in the careful, controlled way of someone choosing not to say anything. On the charge of assault of 3 registered Security Corps officers, this court finds that the force used by the defendant was proportional to an immediate threat against a civilian. Under Galactic Union Statute 7 Aral, a private citizen of any registered species retains the right to intervene in a situation where a civilian is being subjected to unlawful enforcement action, using reasonable force to prevent harm. The officers sustained no permanent injury. This charge is dismissed. The gallery broke. There was no other word for it. The composed, professional murmur that high-status audiences were supposed to maintain just dissolved. People were talking, not loudly, not rudely, but in the undeniable way of a crowd that has just seen something they did not expect. Vorlen let it run for exactly 4 seconds. Then the gavel came down. Silence. He looked at Mara. She was not smiling right now. She was watching him with the quiet attention of someone waiting for the final note of a piece of music they have been listening to carefully. On the charge of theft of 1 flatbread sandwich, valued at 3 Pallon credit marks, he said. And here, despite himself, despite 32 years, despite every professional instinct he possessed, Magistrate Vorlen Quiss felt the corner of his mouth make an extremely small and completely undignified movement upward. He stopped it immediately. He was a professional. The defendant is found guilty. Silence. Then Mara Sollis Okafor did something nobody in that courtroom expected. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a disbelieving laugh, a real one. Bright and sudden and completely unself-conscious, like something had genuinely caught her off guard in the best possible way. Seriously, she said. The sandwich was not paid for, Vorlen said, with immense, carefully maintained dignity. I was kind of busy. The law, Vorlen said, does not make exceptions for busy. What's the sentence? Vorlen looked down at his notes. This was the part he had also rehearsed, for different reasons. For the theft of consumable goods valued under 10 credit marks, committed by a first-time offender with no prior Galactic record, the standard sentence is a fine of 20 Pallon credit marks and a formal apology to the vendor. Mara looked at him. The vendor? Yes, the vendor whose stall I was defending when I took the sandwich. The law, Vorlen said again, does not make exceptions. Right. She was smiling again. The full one, now. The one that had been in the room when he walked in, that had never quite left, like a light left on in a window. Fine. 20 credits and an apology. Done. The fine will be collected by the court clerk following these proceedings. And the apology? Vorlen looked at her steadily. I trust, he said, that you are capable of managing it. I'll bring him a sandwich, she said. Better one. I'll pay for it. Guess it. Dal finally remembered how to breathe. It took another hour for the formal paperwork to be completed, the release orders to be processed, and the tribunal to officially transition from a criminal proceeding against Mara Sollis Okafor into what was now, technically, a preliminary investigation into the conduct of Commander Brel Ossin and the Arvin District Security Corps. That investigation would take 6 months, 3 additional judges, a task force from the Galactic Union Oversight Bureau, and a truly uncomfortable number of interviews with vendors who had been for 8 months, very afraid to talk to anyone official. Mara Sollis Okafor was released from the tribunal at the 14th hour. Vorlen was still in his chamber when his clerk Seti knocked and entered with the expression of someone delivering news they were not sure how to categorize. She's gone, Your Honor, Seti said. Good, Vorlen said. She left something. Vorlen looked up. Seti set a small paper bag on his desk. Vorlen looked at it for a moment, then opened it. Inside was a flatbread sandwich, still warm, with a folded note tucked under the wrapping. He unfolded the note. It said, For the record, I did not steal this one, and the garlic is better here than the Arvin district anyway. Good ruling, most of it. Vorlen stared at the sandwich for a long time. Then he ate it, because it was actually very good, and because 32 years had taught him that you took small pleasures where you found them. 3 weeks later, a report crossed his desk from the Galactic Union Oversight Bureau. Routine correspondence. He almost set it aside. He almost did not read the attached personnel note at the bottom, which was flagged as non-urgent and filed under Field Asset Acknowledgement. He read it anyway. The note was brief. It acknowledged that an unnamed field operative of the Bureau had successfully gathered documentation sufficient to initiate a formal investigation into criminal conduct by Security Corps leadership on Pallus Minor. It noted that the operative's methods had been, and the Bureau's language here was wonderful, unconventional but effective. It recommended a commendation, contingent on the operative's willingness to formally register with the Bureau rather than continuing to operate as an independent. The note was dated the day before the trial. Vorlen set it down. He leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, the moonstone walls of the tribunal caught the afternoon light and turned it gold. He thought about dark eyes and a full, easy smile. He thought about a human who had walked toward a scene everyone else was walking away from, because that was apparently just what she did. He thought about 47 pages of file and garlic flatbread, and the way she had watched that surveillance footage like it was a film she had already seen and still liked. He thought about the 3 plain-clothed figures in the gallery. He thought about how she had looked at them for exactly 1 second. He picked up his pen. He wrote, at the bottom of the Bureau correspondence, in the space marked Presiding Judge's Remarks, 1 sentence. It said, "If she ever comes back to my courtroom, I am taking the week off." He stamped it. He filed it. And somewhere out in the sector, on a transport heading towards somewhere Vorlen Quiss would never know, Mara Sollis Okafor sat by a window with her boots up on the seat across from her, watching stars go by at speed, eating a sandwich she had absolutely paid for, and smiling at nothing in particular. Or perhaps at everything. It was honestly hard to tell with humans. That was the thing about them, Vorlen reflected later, much later, when the OSIN investigation was closed and the verdicts were handed down and the Arvin district vendors could set up their stalls without fear again. That was the specific, particular, maddening thing about humans from Deathworlds. They did not need you to understand them. They were perfectly fine either way.